I'm Elle Embers, and this is Cosmic Curiosities.
Hi, and welcome back to Cosmic Curiosities. I'm your host, Elle Embers, and before we dive in today, we're going to take a quick moment. We're going to take a quick moment to come home, to come back to self. So when you're ready, take a long, deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. Relax your jaw and take another deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. Roll your shoulders up and back. Stretch your neck from side to side and take one more deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. And bring your mind to focus on one thing you are grateful for and one thing that is grateful for you. Now, doesn't that feel better? If you'd like to continue this journey, coming back to self, releasing your past to step into a brighter and better future, to gain clarity, confidence, and direction, or simply just come back to peace and learn how to calm the storms of your mind. You can find all the information on how we can work together with past life regression, cosmic channeling, and energetic coaching by sending me a message on Instagram or visit my website llembers.com. Now, speaking of self, today's episode, I'm joined by empowerment coach Claire Campagna, who specializes in astrology and human design. She works to guide us through self-acceptance and understanding so that we can take practical steps to better utilize our natural strengths and live a life in more flow. So, let's dive in. Hi, Claire. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I am so glad to have you on. Every time I talk to you, it's such a vibe.
Agree, 100%.
But before we introduce you to everyone and talk about all of your glamorous info, would you like to tell everyone a little bit about what it is that you do?
For sure. So I feel like I've evolved some from when I started, as we all do. But in summary, I work with astrology and human design specifically, but I use those as tools to really help you to reconnect with yourself on a soul level. That's like my end goal at the end of the day. I want people to feel connected to themselves and infuse their lives with more meaning.
And I mean, it's not an easy thing to do, right? Like, we're always constantly rediscovering who we are, what we, I guess, feel drawn to in terms of our soul and progression. So, I mean, it's constantly changing and evolving, right?
For sure. I feel like the fact that we are dynamic and we do evolve over time is why it is challenging to pin that down, but it's also, to me, why it's so fun to make that your goal, because you get to change. It's like a permission slip to evolve and grow and shift and try new things. And if you don't like it, that's cool. Do something else.
Yes. I love that. I love that. I always had issues stepping into adulthood and like trying to find a career and being like, oh, I'll try this. Oh, I don't like this, so I'm going to change jobs. And everyone would be like, oh, what are you doing now? Like real judgy. And I'm like, guys, I can change if I want to.
Yeah, people make such a big deal out of that. Like, oh, you're you're not consistent, you're not reliable, you're not loyal. And it's like, okay, like what do those things matter to a job? I'm trying to figure out what I want to do with how I spend 40 plus hours a week of my life. Like this is kind of a big deal to me. I don't really want to just like pick the first thing that falls into my lap. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, if new opportunities present themselves and you don't take up the opportunity, then you're also judged for not wanting to better yourself and take a better opportunity. So, I mean, you can't win either way.
You really can't. It always blows my mind how everyone just feels entitled to an explanation. I'm like, look, guys, I don't even know why I'm doing things half the time. I'm just feeling called to do it. And my brain hasn't caught up for me to explain to you why yet. I just know that I shouldn't be here and I want to go there. I'll tell you when it lands.
Yeah.
But I think that I'm grateful to now know that that's what's happening because, I think a lot of people don't know that that's what's happening for them. And they just spit out whatever the person needs to hear or they think the person wants to hear, or they kind of let themselves get defeated by somebody else's words and just do what's expected of them. And I feel like now I'm in a place where like that's just not the case for me. And that's what I really want to help other people, again, give them that permission slip to do. It's like, here's a roadmap with your human design and astrology to help direct you. But at the end of the day, the way that this looks, the way that you decide to play this roadmap out is totally up to you. It's subjective. It can shift and it can evolve over time as you will.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, when you kind of look at your two main possibilities there, it's kind of like, well, I have the option to people please, or I can let this kind of defeat me. Like, not everyone is aware that there's a third option that's like, well, hang on a minute. I can do whatever I want to do and fulfill my needs and complete whatever thing that I'm drawn to, right? So it's kind of just opening up more awareness to that third option.
Yes, for sure. I know there's a lot of people out there that were in a position similar to where I was that I didn't know what I wanted. And that was why I didn't feel like I was people pleasing or like I was getting defeated. Like I literally was just doing what was expected of me because I didn't feel like or I didn't know how to figure out what I actually did care about, what did light me up, what I found enjoyable, what was something igniting my passion because I just did whatever I was quote unquote good at and rolled with it and never paused to ask the question. So like if you had told me when I was 21 that I was actually doing what everybody wanted me to do, I would have been like, no, I'm not. But now I can clearly look back and see that's exactly what was happening. So I think that that's also a factor as well as like that level of just awareness that I want to give people too, of just like, you actually do probably have things that you like if you haven't ever thought about that before.
Yeah, totally. It's like, are you doing this because it's what's expected of you, or are you doing it because this is what you want to do? Like, let's figure that out.
Yes, which sounds so obvious, especially to people who are really passionate about certain things or have like very distinct hobbies or interests. Like my husband, like he was very confused when I was going through my existential crisis because he is such a definitive person in his interests and in his hobbies and has been since he was a child. Like, yes, they've evolved and grown as he has, but they're still in the same sphere of what they were when he was like 5 years old. And
Yeah.
I envy that, but I also like have grown to love myself and the way that I kind of like dabble in things throughout life and don't necessarily stick to things. And to your point, like I used to see that as a commitment issue or like, wow, I really don't care about much long enough to stick with it. And it's like, no, I actually just feel like I'm here to sample things and try them out and literally be this version of myself in this sphere and that version of myself in that sphere. And that doesn't mean I'm a hypocrite. That means I'm adaptable and I'm multifaceted.
Yeah, it's all about perspective. So let's rewind. Let's go back to the start. So how did you find yourself working in astrology and human design? What did this unfold in your life?
Very long story short, I had my own quarter life crisis and I, as you just heard, was super lost and super confused about who I even was, what I even cared about, just like a true existential crisis of oh my gosh, is this all my life is? Like, do I even care about anything? Where am I headed? What am I doing? And, naturally, when you're in that kind of state of desperation, I'll call it, of just grasping at anything that will guide you to clarity, I found astrology. And yeah, most of us have heard of our sun sign, at least. Like, we know when we were born. And I will say, like, I came from an engineering background, and I didn't want to like astrology or be drawn to it. Like, I was like, this is kind of stupid. But again, I was in that state of wanting to search and wanting clarity. And I could not deny how much of it was resonating with me and how much of it was so true to me without anybody going inside my brain and seeing any of this stuff. And I'm the kind of person that when something like that does pique my interest, I'll go down the rabbit hole real deep. Again, as you just heard, I might not stay there forever, but in this case, I did. I lingered. And I just started getting anybody's information that would give it to me and learning that way, learning through example, like, oh, I know that this person has this moon and so does that person. And that's so funny. Here's a commonality that I see showing in both of them that actually really aligns with that. And just really learning through sample size and example. And the same thing happened with human design, just naturally over the course of once you go down the astrology rabbit hole, you usually eventually find the human design rabbit hole as well. And I knew I wanted to leave my corporate job, and ultimately it evolved into what it is now. And it was one of those things where it was like, okay, like people are coming to me, asking me questions about this stuff often enough that number one, I probably need to be charging for it because it's taking a lot of my time and energy. And number two, I actually do know a lot of stuff about this right now. And it is worth sharing it because it's literally changed my life.
Definitely. I think that's how we all kind of stumble down this path of being a practitioner in some modality, is we have had our own transformational experience, and then other people are like, what did you do? Like, what did you sign up for? Like, tell me everything. And then you're like, oh, okay. And then it all just kind of unfolds from there.
Exactly. And it's funny because we're sitting here like a day away from the spring eclipses in 2023 when we record this, or spring in my time zone. The eclipses. And it's funny because last year at this time is actually when I made the decision that I wanted to quit my corporate job of 7 years during the eclipse portal. Like, not intentionally, but they are those like life-changing, destined, fated moments. And I have been reflecting on it because this week I've been thinking about how the eclipse is coming up, and it was like, it really was that for me. It changed the entire trajectory of my life from just a simple decision that I made during that time period that I had been sitting on for years and just, was too scared to actually pull the trigger on.
That's so funny. I mean, I was in a similar boat this time last year. When the eclipse happened, I was like, cool, yep, past lives are going to be my jam, and that's what I'm going to do, and we're going to go down the rabbit hole now.
Yep.
Funny
I love
how
it.
It correlates.
It really is. It's one of those things where it's like, I try not to use astrology personally in a predictive way too much. I, as you heard, go down the rabbit hole, and I can overthink it. I can overanalyze it. And honestly, it can just play out in so many different ways that, to me, I find it to be much more helpful to just live my life and use it reflectively and look back and learn from it in that way. So like, again, this is, I was trying not to be like, I'm going to make a massive life-changing decision now that it's the eclipse portal last year. It was like, no, I can now just look back and say, oh shit, that idea struck me during the eclipse portal last year.
Yeah. So if you're feeling comfortable, would you like to share a little bit about your chart and what kind of unfolded through the eclipses that kind of led you, I guess, diving down the rabbit hole, yeah, and wanting to seek clarity, and what this provided clarity in your life?
For sure. So I really feel like eclipses are catalysts of fate. Like, I love how Kate Fowley is the one who kind of like planted that seed in my mind of saying like they expedite the inevitable. And I, like I said, had been sitting on, I don't like this, but I don't know what else is out there. I really just sat with just like being pissed off at my life for a year or so. And then, no joke, starts the Taurus Scorpio eclipses. And I had been doing all these things. Like I'd been looking at astrology and human design in the background already. But that was really when I decided to actually do something about it, to get my life together, to figure out how to come up with my exit plan, knowing that I wasn't going to rush it. I was going to do it on my time. But like, I'm a Taurus rising. I also have a ton of fixed placements in my chart. Like pretty much my whole chart has fixed placements. And so the eclipses over the past 2 years have been just massively impacting me in every way. I also have my Saturn in Aquarius. So I was going through my Saturn return during this as well, which also was squaring the eclipses. So, might I add that because I'm a Taurus rising and my Saturn's in Aquarius, I also have an Aquarius stellium, which is my 10th house of career. So just like the most literal way that this was all playing out, I quit my job during this time, during all of those transits. I decided to completely change the way I was showing up in the world, rising sign. And I mean, so many other things unfolded as well, but like I would say overarchingly, those are the biggest things that came out of this. And then now how I use them, transits and aspects like that aside, like I think they are incredible tools, the birth chart, the transit charts, and then human design separately, to really just have, again, like a mirror held up to us to see kind of potentials, if you will. I think of it all as a spectrum. Like pop astrology is usually going to tell you the absolute worst way that certain placements can pan out. Like, oh my God, I'm never going to date an Aries man or whatever, whatever your flavor of that is. And it's just like, that's just not the case. There's always an opposite to whatever that like worst case scenario that you think is. And so I really like to know both ends of that spectrum. I definitely am making sure that people, when I give readings, that they aren't only getting the doomsday picture of who they are, but I also am very open about the potentials on the lower road of how these expressions can show up as well. I know that personally in my life, I like to know my strengths just as I like to know my potential pitfalls as well. And I think understanding that helps you to just really know yourself, love yourself better, of course, first and foremost, but then also it's drastically changed how I relate to other people as well. Knowing my own information, but also knowing their information and knowing, okay, this is not going to get received well if I say it in this way, or if I do it in this way, or if I do it at that time. And just recognizing those things and literally seeing them play out live has straight up changed everything in my life.
Yeah. And I guess human design kind of plays into that as well when you think about the different design types and how they, I guess, process or approach different situations. So if you're having an idea of their design type and their astrology, then you're going to be able to understand how to interact with that person on a much more, I guess, smooth level. Like I was like, there's a better word for this, but I'm going to go with smooth.
No, that's literally how I describe it, is when you understand your human design specifically, you are figuring out how to live in greater flow with what is just naturally going to not be resistant for you. Like, let's stop running into these blocks that we literally don't have to if we are just aware of how we operate with other people.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, human design has become a really popular thing. So many people are practicing it now, and there's so many different human design readers and coaches and things like that. But I don't know about you, but in my experience, a lot of it, I feel like they're just kind of dumping this information on me. And then I have to try and like figure out what I'm supposed to do with this. And I'm like,
and it's a lot of information too.
Yeah. And I'm like, great, okay, I'm a Manny Gen and I make decisions with my gut feeling, and it's like I don't know how to incorporate the rest of that information into my daily life. Like how do I move this?
Like,
Yeah.
you seem like someone from getting to know you a bit that's really grounded and really intentional with what you do. I feel like you would be the complete opposite of this and showing everyone kind of what elements they can take and use in their life. Am I making a correct assumption here? Yeah.
Thank you, first of all. But yeah, I really, really try to give applicable real life examples because I agree, like that's when things click. That's what's going to actually make it make sense. That's what people are looking for. They would have bought the book themselves and read it if they wanted to know what just you regurgitating the facts back out at them. So yeah, I definitely make it a point in my readings and in my work with people to make sure that they understand what this actually means, how to actually integrate this into their lives on a daily basis versus just like, to your point, knowing what your chart says.
Yeah.
What does it mean though?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, it's great that I have this information now, but what am I supposed to do with it? Where do I go from here?
Yep.
So what are some tips that you are generally giving a lot of your clients when they first find out what their information is? What's step one to really putting this into practice?
Yeah, I would say it's going to slightly differ just based on like what your chart is telling me. But overall, I would say I really try to connect the dots between things. That's why I like to look at the whole chart. That's why I like to look at both charts to find these common themes, because again, that's when things click for people. That's when they can really recognize, oh, I actually literally see that playing out in my life. And whether it's a, quote unquote strength or a quote unquote weakness, they know, okay, I see this playing out. How can I leverage the things that I see are clearly coming up repeatedly as strengths in my chart? How can I really lean into those more? And then in terms of the potential weaknesses, it's like, let's be aware of, again, not just every tiny minor flaw that could come out in your chart, but like, what are the big glaring commonalities that you're potentially going to fall back into patterns with over both of these charts, so that again, we can raise that level of awareness and come up with practices that are going to help you to not get caught in those patterns and those loops when they do hit, because they will. Like, that's fine. We're humans. But the point is to shorten the gap so that you can bounce back faster and get back to leveraging those strengths.
Yeah. So I guess, correct me if this example is completely off, like not even making sense.
Oh,
But
I'm
if you're looking at if you're looking at both your human design and your astrology, and let's say, for example, you can tell how much I don't know about this just by this example, I'm sure, but in your human design type, let's say that you're quick to anger, right? You're frustrated. That's your like not living in alignment or whatever. And then something in astrology is saying that, there's a lot of fire there, there's a lot of passion there, and this particular transit might be coming up that's going to interfere with their natal chart, and it's going to cause, I don't know, a heated argument, whether it be with a relationship or a friendship or a partnership or work or whatever. And this is kind of how you can best diffuse the situation from a design type and what to expect moving through this transit. Is that am I on the right path?
Yes, I would say I don't necessarily do it often, I should say, unless there's like some huge thing coming up, like eclipses, and I'm reading your chart and you have like an Aries stellium or something right now before an Aries eclipse. But I really try to not do it too transit specific. Like next week, it's more like, hey, to your point, hey, you have a fire Venus and a fire moon, and these have some traditionally challenging aspects going on as well. And you're a manifestor in human design, which means your not self is anger. So knowing those things, let's find ways to channel all of that fiery, passionate energy that you clearly have within you. Let's find ways that you can channel that, because it's all like pressure. It's all pent up energy that needs to get channeled and released in some way. And if you're not doing that in a direction that's, beneficial or whatever you want to call it, it's probably going to end up in a blow up fight, like you're saying, or it's probably going to end up in some situation that you don't want it to, especially when, again, that you're prone to reacting in those really big reactive ways. And so it's like, let's find ways to not pretend that that doesn't exist within you, because it does. Let's find ways that you can actually regularly exercise to get that out of you, that you can maybe like get into boxing or something, some sort of outlet that allows you to release that. Maybe when you feel that coming up, you don't pretend that it's not, and you go out to your car and you scream in your car. Like, it's about recognizing both sides of the spectrum and not pretending that one doesn't exist. And finding ways to, again, redirect where that energy is going in a way that's going to be more productive than a blow up fight would be.
Yes. See, I love this already, because it's like, it's giving you that adaptability to put this into your life. Because so often it's like, okay, yeah, here, I know my natal chart now. Like, I don't know what to do with this now. And I know my human design. Great. That's fascinating. Do I know more about myself, or do I just know a lot of information?
Exactly. Yeah. My chart readings all come with an integration coaching session. Like, that is required. You are not allowed to just get a written reading and walk away with it. You need to understand what to do with this piece of paper that I just spent hours of my life putting together for you. Because that's the goal. Like, I don't want to just share your chart that you could pull up online and figure out on your own for you. I think that is part of what I bring to the table with it. Like, I am able to interpret it and have at this point gathered enough examples to be able to explain it in a way that usually does click with people, which is like not often going to happen if they're just reading what they find online.
Yeah, totally. And you're very grounded, and you're very like, well, this is how this could potentially portray, and this is how to best navigate your way through that. Like, you're not going to just be like, oh, it's all fairies and butterflies. Like,
no,
you're going to be real.
Not.
Yeah.
Yes. And be like, you have a potential inclination to overindulge in substances. I just want you to be aware with this. Like, I'm not going to pretend that that doesn't exist in your chart.
Yeah.
And, I'm also not going to say like, you're going to die of addiction, like, I'm not going to jump to conclusions either, but it's all about like, I want to know all of the potentials so that I can work with them and not pretend they're not there, because they are. And that's when we get in trouble.
Yes. Trying to shove things under the rug and be like, oh, let's just ignore this part and move on to something else. And you're missing this huge element of, what could potentially unfold. Yeah.
And I think that the beauty of looking at all parts of ourselves and recognizing that we do have, darker parts and lighter parts of us. It's funny how much I've seen in my life and in just people's lives that I've come across throughout this path so far, that when they acknowledge that those lower roads exist and those lower expressions do exist within them, they then are like, okay, like, they're there. So I'm actively always seeking to lean closer to the side of my strengths, to the side of what I actually want to be doing, to the parts of me that I know, if I'm equally a person who's naturally getting mad at things, I'm also probably a person, or who knows, but you also have other strengths that you're naturally good at as well.
Yeah.
Like, you're not just naturally good at bad things. So I feel like it's kind of like the funny thing that happens when we do acknowledge all parts of ourselves and we do look at them and not pretend that they're not there, is that it almost like just inevitably pushes you closer to the parts that you can play up and that you want to play up.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to learning to accept all parts of ourselves, because we're either one or the other, right? Like, we think we're just, oh, I'm naturally a shitty person, or I'm naturally the best person in the world. It's never kind of an easy mix of the two. We're always one or the other. In my experience, most people. So I guess using these tools to come into that awareness of like, hey, where there is dark, there is light, where there is good, there is bad, and learning to lean into the strengths and weaknesses of both sides, that's going to help you enormously better know yourself and better navigate your way through your journey just in life, right? Because you then understand how to better communicate with people, how to better achieve your goals and chase what, after all, you're really here to do.
For sure. I think it goes back to what we were talking about early in the conversation of just like, it raises your level of awareness. I will say, usually when I'm doing these charts, people are already aware of the things that I'm sharing with them. They recognize it instantly. It's like, oh, thank God I knew that was there. More so than like, what do you mean? Like, I'm usually not just like dropping the microphone and blasting people with these like crazy things that they don't know about themselves. You usually know yourself. It's just parts that you've locked away or you've never had acknowledged by somebody other than you. So you don't know that it's actually legit, or you think the worst case scenario about it, or whatever it may be. And having somebody mirror it back to you in, you know, the most objective way that I can as a human being, I feel like I see people's awareness just raise a level in knowing themselves and understanding how they are actually operating in the world around them. And that does just in turn allow you to be a more intentional person, if that is your goal, which I think, you know, most people getting a birth chart reading, that is usually their goal.
Yeah.
So in some form or fashion. And when you are aware and you're like able to actually be a witness to what's going on in your life, you usually are able to then be more meaningful and be more intentional in your day-to-day life. It's really hard to do that when you're not even aware of like how you're behaving.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too it can be quite validating, like you said, not having the validation prior to think, well, this is actually how I do show up in the world, but you think this is how you show up in the world. So when someone is able to kind of validate that belief system or that thought process, it can be quite relieving in a sense, because you're like, wow, okay, it's not just me that sees this.
For sure. Especially if you have these parts of yourself that you felt like have always been misunderstood or felt like nobody's ever seen fully. To me, I had a lot of those moments when reading my own birth chart and human design charts and getting readings done as well. And just being like, I feel so seen. I feel so validated that I'm not just what I present or what I have been presenting. There's so much more to me. And from the human design perspective, like I'm a projector, and learning that I was in, you know, the 20% of the population, and no wonder these things that work for the rest of the world have worked for me because I've been able to fake it. But wow, I'm burning out a lot faster and I'm just not showing it on the surface. It's like, it was such a relief to me to find out that I wasn't meant to be operating in that way. No wonder I was running into so much resistance. No wonder I find so much more flow when I'm doing things this way. It was like putting a label on something that I knew was there, but like couldn't articulate.
Yeah. I mean, I even found that I make decisions from sacral and everything is a gut feeling. And I'm always like, no, I just feel like this is the right thing. Or no, I just feel there's something off here. Like, and just people being like, yeah, I don't know. And I'm like, no, there's something, like I can feel it in my stomach.
Yes. But perfect example of like a benefit of that and also like a challenge of that. I think people who have a sacral authority, like that is such a superpower. I envy you. I obviously don't have a defined sacral center as a projector. And I also recognize that that has to be so challenging. Any of the authorities like that, like splenic would fall into that category as well, of like, when you have the bodily or the sensory knowing that something is right or wrong for you, you know, air quotes, obviously not necessarily those words, but you can't yet describe why. Your brain hasn't caught up to the reasoning behind it or the explanation. That is really, really challenging when you're dealing with other people or having to consider other people in those decisions, because you literally know in your bones that it is right or wrong to proceed or not with a certain thing. And it's like, people want to know why, which I get also.
Yeah.
but like, it's a blessing and a curse for sure in that way, where it's like, unless you just happen to surround yourself with people who understand human design and are accepting of it, that's not an acceptable response. Like, oh, my sacral told me to do it.
Yeah, exactly. It's I mean, that has been a big thing I've noticed a lot through my life. I mean, putting psychic mediumship abilities aside, just having that gut feeling and not being able to explain why I feel a certain way, and people just going, nah, I don't think that's a thing. And I'm like, no, trust me, like, this has never steered me wrong.
It's a thing. It's definitely a thing. Yeah. And I think like one of the cool things with it too is you can use it in such like minor things as well. Like you can use that to your advantage and just like ask yourself yes and no questions
Yeah.
and literally get direction based on what your gut is telling you.
Totally, totally. And, you know, once you kind of have the awareness that that's how you operate as well, like your strength there grows, because you're paying more attention to it, you have more awareness of it, and then, you know, you're also making things easier for yourself because you're not fighting against it.
Exactly. You're able to have a different level of trust that it's going to pan out. And what I always tell people, like no matter what your authority is, that's one of the practices I give people, because that's obviously a huge part of human design and a way to get your life into alignment with like where you actually want it to be, to dabble with things that just are inconsequential. Like use your authority and play with it on things that just don't matter that much, so that you can strengthen that muscle and you can build trust that when the big things do come, it's not going to not be scary to rely on something that's not your brain in a situation like that. But it is going to be a lot easier to trust that it's not going to lead you down the wrong path.
Yeah, definitely. So coming back, I guess, sorry, this like sidetracked my brain to like the people pleaser conversation we were having
Oh, yeah.
at the start.
I love it.
About thinking that we know what we want and not really knowing what we want, and we're doing things out of expectation or to please others. How does our authority kind of affect the way that we people please?
Interesting. I feel that could come up differently for different people. And let me know if this feels like a diversion to the question, because really, I feel like the way that I've made the most sense out of my people pleasing personally actually ties back to my Pisces moon and Venus in astrology. That's where I make the most sense of it, which also happened to be in my 11th house of friendships and connections and the way that I, connect with society in general. And also my Venus it's exactly trine my Pluto in Scorpio, which is conjunct my descendant, which if you are not familiar with astrology, I'm so sorry for all of that lingo. All that is to say, Pisces on the low road will say, like, as I was people pleasing like crazy my entire life, it really is the sign that it just wants everybody to be on the same wavelength, almost, like, for lack of a better way of putting it. And yes, a lot of the time that can be me laying down my own needs for other people. I think one of the things that I have come to realize with it, though, is I genuinely also, with that placement, actually do get joy out of other people having joy. So sometimes when I felt like, because then once you figure out you're a people pleaser, you like label everything you're doing as people pleasing every time you like do something other people want to do. And I've since realized, like, I'm not a person that has extremely strong opinions. I am a person that literally, if that's where you want to go get coffee, like I don't have a strong opinion, and I'm not just like letting you walk all over me by always choosing. that's the place you're going to be happier at, then I'm actually probably going to be happier there too. So I feel like those things have really pointed to it for me. And the aspect to Pluto that I was mentioning earlier, I can very clearly, again, like reflectively look back in my life and see how the control and the power struggle aspects came through very strongly in a lot of my close friendships growing up in a lot of different ways, both my doing and theirs.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that was a diversion. I honestly think that you're right. There would be different things in different people's charts that would account to potentially why they are people pleasing or how they are people pleasing. Because, again, we can potentially, quote unquote, people please on different areas of our lives. And like my husband, he's so much like you in the way that he doesn't have super strong opinions about things. And he's also, there's Pisces somewhere in his chart, I think.
Has to be.
And he gets a lot of his happiness from me being happy. So as long as he's like, well, you know, whatever makes you happy is going to make me happy. So you pick the place, pick, you know, whatever. And he just rolls with it. So like, I used to think that he could just never make a decision. I was always like, why can't you just pick something? Like, why does this always have to come down to like what I want to do? Like, can't you just pick something? And I used to think it was like a question of indecisiveness or people pleasing. And it just really opened my awareness of him, looking at his astrology and his human design and kind of putting things together of where he finds his joy. And yeah, it definitely put things into a better perspective.
Yeah, it's helped me a ton because, you know, you can really criticize yourself when that's your own placement as well. Like, wow, I literally let people walk all over me. I never have ever chosen what I'm doing with my friend group. Like, I'm just not that person. I have no problem being the one that like is the authority in other situations, but like in terms of picking what we're doing to have fun, like never ever. I even just skipped a bachelorette altogether. Like I didn't even have one. I don't even want to think about picking something that everyone wants to do. And yes, some people would be like, wow, you literally can't even like choose what you like. And I'm like, no, like I actually, because I'm so adaptable, I have such a wide range of friends that I don't think I could pick something that all of them would like. And that's fine. They don't have to, but also like, I don't want to be there if none of them want to be there. So anyway, that's a different tangent, but what's coming up too, just to quickly answer like the initial question, because I've had it kind of register a little bit more, is something that came up for me with I have an emotional authority in human design. And so like in that example, again, I'm just going to keep bringing it back to awareness because that's what it just keeps coming back to for me. It's like the recognition of how you are going to make the most aligned decisions for yourself is really the key. Though the way that you're going to enforce that, set boundaries around it, actually implement it is going to be subjective to the person. And also, as you just heard, play other factors in from the rest of their charts as well to kind of help inform how you're going to do that. But I think the awareness of how you are best going to make decisions is really going to be the key. Like even when I was still in my corporate job, it was such a click moment for me of being like, oh, no wonder when I get forced to make those really snap decisions at work, no wonder I completely panic and I like usually end up regretting what I said, what I committed to. But when I actually have the luxury of 24, 48 hours a week to make the decision, and for me, ride the emotional wave and like know what the high would feel like, know what the low would feel like, and still know if I want to do it when I've hit the plateau, those were the ones that I genuinely like never regretted. It's like, well, ultimately, like it could have gone this way, it could have gone that way, whether it panned out or not. I know I made the decision that was best for me.
Yeah. It's so interesting that you bring up the emotional and non-emotional, because I am the only non-emotional in my family. Like so I'm dealing
Bless
with
you.
a lot of emotional decision makers. So it's been a journey for me to have a bit more of understanding of how they make decisions and not get frustrated that they're not doing things at the time that I want them to do something and make a decision.
Yeah, patience.
Yeah.
Patience. Yeah. Yes, that's huge, especially being that you're sacral. Is your emotional center open?
Oh, that I can't remember. I remember
Okay, it doesn't matter.
I remember it's non-emotional, and I remember it's sacral. That's the only thing I remember.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely undefined if you're not emotional. I just was wondering, like I keep bringing up my husband, but we just have kind of cool charts next to each other. He is a self-projected projector. So he's also a projector. We're both 5-1 projectors, which is cool. But he
Yeah.
is self-projected, which means it's coming out of his identity center. My identity center is completely open. I don't have one gate activated in it. His emotional center is completely open and he doesn't have one gate activated in it. So, where both of our decision making is coming from, the other is completely open, which has been a really fun experiment to play with and figure out like what that means, how it plays out. If you are familiar with human design, you know that when somebody has an open center, like it just can amplify the other person's activity going on there. It can also confuse the hell out of them when you're operating in a certain way and they're like, what is going on here? Especially if they do take on that energy and it's not theirs. And I think that's been a huge piece, again, back to the awareness, but like us knowing that about each other has helped a ton, because it's like, this isn't your emotion. I'm just riding the low of an emotional wave and I'm just going to go in the other room for an hour and I'll come back in when I'm ready. And it has nothing to do with anything other than I ride an emotional wave on a daily basis and you don't need to ride it with me because it's not yours.
Yeah. I think it just helps because, I mean, especially in marriages and relationships, you always have these like little things that irk you about the other person, right? And you're just like, why can't you just be a fucking normal person? Like, why can't you just do things this way? And I think this kind of outlays a lot more awareness and understanding as to how they operate as a human being. So then you can then operate as a couple in a lot more satisfying, aligned, and understanding manner. And then, of course, you know, everyone's happier.
100%. I mean, I think also it ties back to like the accepting of all parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons we get irked in relationships where we are so close with people is because like whether it's a romantic relationship or like a sibling even, or a parent, like where you're just like living in the same house as somebody or a child, it can be really frustrating when we like so confidently feel like our way that we do it is the better way, is the more efficient way, is the way that works better. It's like, why the hell would you not do it this way? And when the other person can accept that their way is how they're doing it and they're okay with it and they can articulate that and they can explain it to you and be okay with it themselves, it's like, oh shit, you're right. Like that's, you actually can't control that. That's the way it is. And I have my own shit like that. And why can't I accept it if you can?
Absolutely. Yeah. 100% just coming it just all comes back to that self-aware and self-accept and accepting all parts of ourselves. Like, to be real, like I can appreciate astrology and I know a little bit about like my own stuff and my family. And same with human design. I'm like, oh yeah, I can appreciate, you know, the little bits and pieces. But I've never really put 2 and 2 together until this conversation.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of people don't. And I know that this is also just like the lens that I probably see them through, but it's been, as I've said like several times, like it's been life-changing for me to view them in this way and to use them as tools in this way. And I do think they go hand in hand with each other when you can just understand enough. You don't have to know the level that I know or that anybody else knows about it. It's, again, what are the big overarching themes and how can we connect those dots and take those away with us to actually change our lives? And when those become second nature, how can we maybe go a layer deeper if we want to? Like, it's all about that self-acceptance though. And to me, these have been like just tremendous tools in supporting that.
100%. Like I feel kind of speechless, like because I've just had like all these little sparks go off in my brain that I'm like, oh that, oh this makes sense now, and it's just kind of like, Oh, shit.
I love it. Well, I think that's like the thing, right? Like, why can't we be looking at these as real life tools? Like, they're not just a piece of paper with a pretty chart on it. Like, let's see how it's actually playing out in real life so that we can use this information to our benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, Claire, thank you so much for for sharing today, because this has been helpful for me. I don't know about anyone else right now, but this is for me. I mean, amazing.
I'm so glad.
But I'm sure if anyone else is, they are so caught up in everything that you've said and they're like, I need to know more, like, tell me how I fix this in my life and use this as a tool, where can they find you? How can they work with you?
Yes. So my website is probably the best way to find just all the ways to work with me. And that's just claire-campagna.com. Will it be in the show notes, or do I need to spell that?
Yeah, it'll be in the show notes.
It's a long one. And then if you want to actually interact and just see kind of more frequent things, and I do like share a bunch of reels on these topics, my Instagram is a good place to connect as well. And that's just Claire.Campagna.
And give your podcast a little plug there too.
Okay. Allow Me to Clarify is also my podcast, and we did an episode together too, so definitely listen to that.
Yes, great name, by the way. I fucking love it. It's like,
thank you.
Every time I see it, I'm just like, that is so brilliant. That is so great.
It was one of those that was, again, like I sat on it, my damn Taurus rising. I sat on like, oh, I should have a podcast for like 2 years. And then this name just like dropped into my brain one day. And I was like, all right, it's time. Guess I need to create it because I can't just sit on that name.
Yes. No, it is so good. It is so good. And I mean, guys, definitely check Claire's podcast out. We do an episode where I channel on a podcast for the first time. She took my virginity, and
so honored.
And I absolutely love her. So definitely check it out. But thank you so much, babe. It's been an honor having you on.
Agree. Thank you for having me.
Well, this is your Earth Side Spirit Guide signing off for the week. If you'd like to know more about how you can work with me, you can follow me on Instagram at l.embers or visit my website lembers.com.